Edmonton Centre.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to rise today and speak to Bill 9, Protecting Choice for Women Accessing Healthcare Act. You know, Madam Speaker, I've been here in this House and many times heard from the members opposite about the consideration that they feel I should be giving my actions in this House. I've been told that I failed to consider how the votes that I cast, legislation that I've supported, would affect farmers and ranchers, or business people, or seniors, or children in care, persons with developmental disabilities. I've watched as the members opposite have called myself and my colleagues out because they felt we were not speaking up enough on a particular debate. I recall in more than one debate, often during votes, hearing the refrain, "Albertans are watching." Indeed, Madam Speaker, Albertans are watching today. You know, Madam Speaker, I've also watched as members opposite have appeared on and with so-called media organizations that spread vile misinformation and prejudice about various Albertan communities, whether that be individuals from the Muslim community, the LGBTQ2S+ community. Many have since distanced themselves. Others have continued that association recently. I've watched as the leader of the official opposition has used language denigrating and marginalizing individuals struggling with substance use disorders, and encourage and spread misleading information about peer support groups for LGBTQS+ youth. I've stood in this House and I've called that out, because that kind of stigma does real damage to real people. And to foment discrimination or prejudice is a dangerous, dangerous thing for persons who are public leaders and elected representatives. Now, Madam Speaker, I recognize that on many of these issues, people have concerns based on religious beliefs and on convictions of faith. And indeed, Madam Speaker, I grew up in the church. I grew up in a very strict Christian home. And for much of my life, I indeed subscribed to religious belief, and it was very important to me. And as a young man, indeed, I was quite zealous. That changed over the years as I dealt with my own experiences and I grew to know more of the world. But always, what I learned in those years has shaped me as an individual. The code of moral conduct by which I conduct myself. And indeed, the types of decisions I make even on legislation such as this. And indeed, when this legislation came forward and I saw this debate in the House, I was reminded of a story from the Gospel of Matthew. Or pardon me, from the Gospel of John. I apologize. From the book of John that I'm looking at today, a story of Jesus. And he had gone to teach at the temple. And as he was sitting there and teaching people in the temple, teachers of religious law and the Pharisees, they brought in a woman in front of him who they had caught in the act of adultery. And they put her in front of everybody in that crowd, and they said to Jesus, they said, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. The law of Moses says we should stone her. What do you say?" Now, it notes here that they were trying to trap him. They were trying to get Jesus to say something they could use against him. Well, we're certainly familiar with that in politics. But, you know, Jesus ignored them and just sat and wrote with his dust, in the dust with his finger. And then they kept demanding that he provide them with an answer. So he stood up and said, "Okay, well, let whoever among you has never sinned cast the first stone." And then he stooped down and he started writing in the dust again. And every one of those people that were there to accuse that woman, one by one, they slipped away, beginning with the oldest. That's an interesting note. Probably because they have more memory of their life and the things they'd personally done. But every last one of those individuals left. And then Jesus stood up and he went and he spoke to that woman. He said, "So, where are your accusers? Didn't even one of them condemn you?" And she said, "No, Lord." And so he said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Now, Madam Speaker, one of the things I have carried forward from what I learned growing up as the most important principle when we are dealing with other people is you put the people first. Compassion comes first. Judgment is set aside. Compassion comes first. Whatever my personal conviction, whatever my personal belief. That is the example I see when I read the Gospels and when I remember what I have learned. Is that compassion, the spirit of the law, how we treat other people always comes before making a rule of moral judgment. And indeed, Madam Speaker, that is at the heart of what we are looking at here today. None of us has the right to stand and cast stones at any woman at the most vulnerable point in her life, potentially, who is facing an incredibly difficult decision. None of us has the right to sit in judgment of that individual and tell her what she should or should not do. Indeed, none of us have the right to increase stigma on that woman and make her suffering worse. That is why we are bringing forward this legislation, to provide that protection and to provide that principle of compassion and understanding. Individuals can hold their personal convictions. They can do so at a respectful distance, in a manner which is not going to increase the difficulty for women who are simply trying to access a health care service at a difficult time of their lives. Now, Madam Speaker, the floor of this chamber, in between our two sides, is littered with stones cast from glass houses. But I will say I am disappointed. I respect that some members of the opposition are here in the chamber today to be part of debate and as representative of their parties, and I acknowledge the courage that takes. But I am disappointed that given, I guess, what has transpired and what has gone back and forth across this floor, that they are not here today to vote on behalf of their constituents and indeed to ensure that a reasonable and compassionate protection like this is provided to Alberta women. But I will tell you, Madam Speaker, I will proudly stand in favor of Bill 9. Thank you.